Hey guys, what's happening? So, continuing with more talk on the Hunt for Wolverine, digging into the details, the tie-ins, and possible connections beyond that. In this video, I want to talk a bit about Weapon Lost, which we touched on a bit before, but barely just scratching the surface of it. But one of the main reasons that I really stress that you guys really check out the tie-ins for this series in particular is mainly because the Hunt for Wolverine, it isn't structured like your regular event, because mainly you have like your main series that'll have like 8 issues and then a bunch of tie-ins that kind of float around it. And when I say a bunch of tie-ins, it can go up to like 80 to like 100 and something tie-ins going around like 8 issues, which can get crazy. But for the Hunt for Wolverine, the setup is quite a bit different because you have your main one-shot, then outside of that, the tie-ins actually carry the story forward. And when I say carry it forward, of course I mean by going back and saying how everything got to this particular point. But after the one-shot, these 16 issues between Weapon Lost, Adamantium Agenda, Mystery in Madripoor, and what's the last one? Claws of a Killer. But all of these different issues, they actually intertwine and tell the story, giving us the full narrative with like 4 different tones and then ending with the Hunt for Wolverine dead ends, which makes it a lot more manageable because you can definitely go through 16 through 18 different issues, get the whole story, and have a full understanding of what happened in this event. Because generally speaking, the Hunt for Wolverine is a closed incident, unlike Fear itself, which I use as an example because this is an event we covered, which goes around your 100 issue type of event, because it's a bigger event, way more characters are involved, and the tie-ins more so serve the purpose of telling you what other characters were doing while the main event was going down. And at times people have the complaint of, oh, they're just doing this to sell more issues, and part of that's true, but at the same time, what is the fun of having this done all in one book? Like, why not take your time and tell a thoroughly good story? But I'm curious to know what you guys think down in the comments. Like, let me know, do you prefer just 8 issues of an event and that be done with it, no tie-ins? Or would you rather a multiple amount of tie-ins telling you where everybody else was, and with those tie-ins like not necessarily being content that you have to read, but just connected enough to flesh out where people were when all of this went down? I'm real curious to know, so let me know down in the comments, and I'll probably do a survey over in the community section too, so look out for that. Alright, so as far as Weapon Lost, the series itself is really being told in retrospect from the case that Matt Murdock opened when Kitty Pryde asked for his help to find Wolverine. And when Daredevil opened this case, he called it Weapon Lost and took it upon himself to find a few others to help him out to narrow down this search, really putting together this team of sorts to narrow down Wolverine's location and bring him in. And I'm sure some of you are probably thinking that, okay, if Wolverine's missing, why the first person you're gonna go to is a blind dude to see if you've seen him? I get it. Well, for the record, he wasn't the first person, but at the same time, Daredevil has a long history with Wolverine. Plus, on top of that, he has a number of resources and connections to assist him in that search. And what I like about Daredevil actually going on this search is, one, he brings in a couple of true detectives to help him out, but also in combination with that, Daredevil is one of your top hand-to-hand fighters in the Marvel Universe, because he's taken on Taskmaster, Winter Soldier, Black Panther, and even Wolverine, who at the time was brainwashed by Hydra, and Wolverine definitely would have killed him had he been a couple steps slower. But like many of the others that Daredevil has faced, he has at least been able to slow them down or stop them long enough to come to a resolve. But with it being that Daredevil has the experience of fighting against Wolverine and not dying, it really makes him one of the best options of people to conduct the search. And one of the first guys that he recruits is Frank McGee, who we talked about before, A1 detective turned Inhuman, photographic memory, really one of the best people that you could call on to solve this missing persons case, or any case really, because even before he was transformed by the Terrigen Mist, he was a highly decorated officer for over 26 years and cracking cases open left and right. But not long after becoming Inhuman, he decided to leave the New York Police Department, mainly because other officers were uncomfortable with his newfound abilities, and also with his wife leaving him for the same reason. He had later linked up with the Inhumans and started his detective work by helping Medusa find Black Bolt. And so with Frank agreeing to work with Daredevil, the next person they recruited was Misty Knight, who initially rejected the invitation, because at this point in time she was done with the detective work. But after talking to Frank McGee, who has a very similar background to Misty Knight, as far as them both having a life-changing moment that caused them to leave the department, but still having that drive to continue their work on their own. So immediately when Misty had rejected Daredevil's offer, this gave Frank more of a relatable viewpoint or understanding of where Misty was coming from. And for you guys that have seen Luke Cage season 2 on Netflix, like, it's a lot like when Misty went back to work after losing her arm. Frank McGee got that same kind of vibe. Like, when he went back to work, people were looking at him crazy, and he still wanted to continue to do what he needed to do. But after he was changed, he realized that that wasn't the place where he needed to do it. And that connection with Frank is really what changed Misty's mind and brought her on board. And so now the third person that's brought in is actually a connect of Misty's, because it's always good to know somebody who knows somebody. But Misty's connect turned out to be a mutant named Cypher, who many of you longtime X-Men fans and New Mutant fans already know, because he has the ability to decrypt any type of language, be it verbal, digital, body language, any of that. And with him having access to the World Wide Web, this is going to be a huge help for them trying to hunt down Wolverine. But the thing is, when they find him at this point, he is kind of addicted to the internet, really trying to decrypt it all. And I mean, like, literally to the point where he is sitting down, wasting away just on the internet all day, all night. And I know some of you guys are probably like, hey, what's wrong with that? Don't sound too bad. But if you do it to the point where you start to look like this guy, you might want to take up another hobby like blinking, because it's actually pretty helpful and you can do it with friends. No, really, but this dude, his addiction is serious. And in order to get him off, Misty cuts the fiber optic cord feeding internet into the house. So Cypher does what any logical person would do, and he grabs a laser rifle and he starts letting off on them for cutting off his internet. And this causes Daredevil, as a result, to knock him out with one of his batons, because Cypher is overreacting just a little bit about the loss of his high-speed connection. But they take care of him. They get him out the house, they give him some food, because he hasn't eaten in who knows how long. But at the point now where he's thinking straight, he comes up with the idea of pulling together the global search of sightings of Wolverine as a starting point to narrow down what is Logan's most recent location. And a lot of this data he then evolved into an algorithm to find Logan's most recent location. And with doing this aboard Frank McGee's ship, or actually not his ship, but a security force Skycharger that he kind of borrowed from the Inhumans, who he also knows will be pretty pissed if they found out he's using it to help mutants. But with giving Cypher access to this ship and his data, Cypher creates an algorithm that finds more recent locations on a map, and this gives them a number of locations to start at, beginning with the most probable down to the least likely. And with Cypher doing this, of course, a lot of locations popped up. So Misty and Frank were kind of like, okay, take out the locations that have the younger girl, the older man, like the other Wolverines that they know about that are not the Wolverine that they're looking for. And Misty was like, oh yeah, take out the blonde ones too. But with doing this, it was a great tool to get them started to know at least where to start looking and expand from there. And of course, with doing this, there were a couple of misleads. Like, there was this one guy who said that, yeah, he killed Wolverine with his bare hands and like stabbed him. And he showed Frank the scars on his chest, and there were 4 claw marks. And Frank was like, Wolverine has 3 claws. You can Google it. He ain't say Google it, but he was like, you can look online and see. And the guys that were with him who believed it before, they looked online, they were like, yep, yeah, he's right. Yep, 3 claws. But it was just one example of one dead end out of many that they went through, because everything on the internet isn't exactly a viable source. And Cypher's sources pulled up everything from news results to social media, which is what led them to Chicago, where a guy who was a security officer, he had tweeted about seeing Wolverine. But then when Misty asked him, he got kind of shook because he didn't know if she was like coming from corporate and he was about to lose his job. But the guy was honest. He was like, yeah, I posted it. I wasn't really sure if it was him, and I took it back down immediately. And of course, all the while doing this, they had Daredevil nearby so he can kind of hear their heartbeat and tell if they're lying or not. And so what ended up happening is, in the middle of this search, they get a distress call from Ranger Outpost 9, located in Saskatchewan, Canada, which is also known for its connections to Alpha Flight, which have also made more recent connections to the current issues of the Immortal Hulk. And those are things that we may see tie in eventually, but as for this moment here, when they receive this distress call from this outpost, by the time they get there, everyone's dead. Well, almost everyone. But for the ones who were slaughtered here, like limbs are severed, guts are spilled everywhere, it's definitely the aftermath of a slasher. But when they get there, the one who is still alive is actually the female ranger who made the distress call. Given the description that it was one man very much like Wolverine, and she had been taken from the cabin and further out into the woods. And Daredevil is able to follow because he can pick up scents and he can also hear the heartbeat. But at this point, he's only following scent because his sonar is kind of thrown off by the ship's interference. But he's still able to find this Wolverine scent and able to track down the Ranger. So everyone rushes after her except for Cypher. They tell him to get back in the ship. But when they finally track down the Ranger, they find it to be a dead end. No pun intended. But when they get here, they realize that they've just been lured away from the weakest member in the group. And because they all left at one time, chasing after this Wolverine, they left Cypher back at the cabin, all alone and defenseless. Because once they got there, the whole chase after the remaining Ranger, that whole thing was just a setup. And this mysterious Wolverine cut Cypher's throat, not only with the intention of killing him, but also because he can speak a number of languages, so he literally like cuts out his voice box. But when the others get back, they realize that Cypher is actually still alive. And the inhuman ship that they came in on, which actually has a great infirmary, it's really Cypher's only chance of not dying out here in the woods. And so when Frank McGee, who's really the only person who really knows the ship like that, aside from Cypher figuring out what he did, so when Frank takes him on the ship, he's like, forget Cypher, man, don't let this dude get me. Like, forget this guy, he's probably gonna die out here. Just make sure I don't die too. But as it turns out, it is actually Albert, the android Wolverine. And so earlier there was a brief mention of Albert, and we talked about him not too long after, because I figured since the number of Wolverines that they talked about or mentioned, he was the least likely known. And for that reason, in a separate video, I did a breakdown of pretty much his origin and his history leading up to this point. Because he was created by the Reavers to take down Wolverine, but then he became self-aware, teamed up with Elsie, who was a more sophisticated android, and eventually they ran off on their own and started their own life. And so now the crazy thing is when Daredevil, Misty, Frank, and Cypher find android Wolverine out here, he's just not out here just to be slashing people for no reason. And he's not being mind controlled or anything crazy like that. But the sad thing is, he's actually looking for Elsie. And for you guys that have seen the origin video that I did about the two of these, you know that these two are inseparable. And the story of these two being freed from the Reavers and becoming aware of life and wanting to stay alive, that's where they bonded. And Elsie, who upgraded Albert to enhance his intelligence and also to help him save her, they also had a radio frequency bond. So you can just imagine with him no longer having that connection to her, he can only assume the worst. But with the help of Misty and Frank, Daredevil is able to fight Albert off, and as a result, Albert just takes off. But this isn't good because they don't want Albert just running around dangerous like this, just killing random people for whatever reason. So immediately Daredevil does mention that they did weaken his armor on his shoulder, which will help so when he tracks him down, they can hit that weak spot and take him down. And because Daredevil still has a scent, they track him down, and they do. And Cypher, who happens to be still alive, but at this point he isn't able to speak, but he's at least stable. But he follows after them, taking one extra shot at Albert just to make sure he ain't getting up anytime soon. And also possibly because he's still upset that Albert left his throat back in the cabin. But what they end up doing after this couldn't be any bigger of a mistake, because they end up just leaving him there and calling the authorities to come pick him up, and really just giving the authorities like minimal information, not really saying who they are, but just giving enough information so they can find him and take him into custody. But the reason why I say this is a bad idea is because this has been done before. Because last time Albert was left for dead or left into the custody of the police, he just put himself back together and got out. And that's really one of the reasons why I feel like we haven't seen the last of Albert. But not too long after they leave him there in Canada, they go to check back on their older sources, heading back to Chicago to speak to the same security officer that Misty had spoke to, only to get back to his apartment and find him dead, which could only mean that there was some level of credibility to his source, because not only did they find him there dead, but the place was also wired to explode, which let us know that there was someone else involved covering their tracks and eliminating any of the viable sources. But I gotta say, as far as android Wolverine looking for Elsie, man, that just, I hope she's okay, because Albert will go ham if she's not, which will be bad for a lot more people. And when Daredevil was fighting android Wolverine, he said that he is just as dangerous as Wolverine himself, and it's possible that he may be even harder to kill than the actual Wolverine. And it's for that reason that we know that when it comes to Albert, that he's not done, and he's come back from a lot worse damage than what we've seen just happen here in Canada. And as a result, he will not stop until he comes to a resolve as far as where is Elsie. Man, like, I can't get enough of Albert, man. Like, I want him to have a standalone series. But either way, That'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Drop your thoughts, drop your theories. This is one we can talk about all day long. And what I was gonna say before is that as far as weapon loss, what I really like about this series throughout the issues so far is that it's very grounded and it reads very much like a detective type of narrative. Like, not too extravagant, but a real page turner. I definitely recommend for you guys to check this out to get the full story. But that'll do it for this one, guys. We'll definitely talk more about the Hunt for Wolverine. If you're not subscribed, be sure to subscribe so you catch the spills every week, and we'll do it again on the next one. All right, later.